2, 1.
New York, NY. LaunchPod starts now.
Welcome to the New York LaunchPod, the New York Press Club award-winning podcast on the most interesting new startups, businesses, and openings in the New York City area. I'm your host and New York attorney, Hal Coopersmith. In this episode, we are going back to episode 74, where we speak to Jonathan Rosen, the co-founder of the New York Forever campaign. New York was hit hard by COVID, and when we recorded this episode, it was before the vaccine rollout, and we published it in February of 2021. Now, as New York recovers, but is still not quite there yet, it seems appropriate to rebroadcast this episode. So without any further ado, let's go back to episode 74 with Jonathan Rosen. So right now is the perfect moment for this NY Forever campaign. Jonathan, how did this come to be?
Sure. So this started with complaining on text messages with my friends in the PR industry over the summer about how down so much of the media narrative seems to be at New York City. I have a really close friend named Risa Heller who runs her own PR firm, Risa Heller Communications. And she and I were literally moaning about like the 18th New York Times story we read about everyone should move to Maplewood and how to move to the suburbs. And is New York City dead?
Or move to lower tax states?
Sure. Yes, all those things. And so, our thought was, how do we stand up and cheerlead for New York? How do we kind of, we're marketers and communicators. That's what we do. How do we lend whatever help we can to burnish the brand of the city we love and our businesses are in and that we're raising our families in? So from there, we started talking to many of our other colleagues in PR and marketing, both at agencies and on client side. Became a weekly conference call, and lots of ideas were kicked around. And what sort of emerged was the idea of building a brand campaign, but that not just a feel-good campaign, but a campaign that would ask people to really step up and commit to playing an active role in the city's recovery. That everyone has a role to play in making the city we love the place we want it to be. I think there's a lot of people who have enormous hearts and a lot of generosity, and charitable giving in the city has been way up this year, which was awesome. But there's an enormous amount of need. And coming out of COVID, from restaurants that have gone out of business to massive unemployment, to food insecurity, we wanted to think about ways that New Yorkers could step up. So we built this around the idea of a pledge to New York. Our goal is to get 500,000 people online through social. It's a very Instagram sort of first campaign to sign this pledge, commit to being part of New York forever. And what that means is committing to sort of being an active citizen engaged in the city's future.
So it's clear that you are passionate about New York. You talked about how you were texting with your colleagues in PR and marketing. Yeah. But according to you, and everyone knows this, there are 8 million people in New York. Why were you and Risa the two to start this campaign?
Well, look, I think there's tons of people doing all sorts of things. I mean, there's been amazing initiatives that have come out of this moment. I think, as there always are, like New York's history is replete with moments of peril where lots of people step up. And one thing we were inspired by, we found a cover of New York Magazine from 1975. So it said, "We've got to help ourselves." It was all about the civic initiatives, and you've seen that across the city. Whether it's mutual aid groups that have popped up in neighborhoods, help people with rent, GoFundMe campaigns, people with their medical bills. There's an amazing organization that grew out of the pandemic that we're partnering with called ROAR, which is helping support restaurants across the whole city. ROAR didn't exist until the pandemic, and restaurant owners came together to advocate for relief for these small businesses that are really the lifeblood of kind of every neighborhood. We all have our local and the restaurants we love. So I think there have been countless initiatives to help in different ways the city. Everyone in life has their one skill, or hopefully, and ours is hopefully comms and marketing. And so our thought was that this is what we could lend. And so, and we've had some really great partners in the effort too, which I should also, we very early on took our idea to Julie Samuels, who's the founding director of Tech Nyc, which is really a trade association of all the major tech companies kind of at every stage in the city. Emily Anadu, who works with Verizon Media and just does incredible marketing and comms there. Richard Mumby, who's been our creative director, and people very quickly got on board. We went to a creative agency in Lower Manhattan called Verdes that does some of the edgiest creative work in fashion and sneakers, and said, "Do you want to design the brand for this campaign for free?" And they were like, "Yes, like how can we help? Like, let's do it." So, I think we've been banking on a quite evident generosity of spirit in so many New Yorkers, and our experience has been that like that's borne out. Even with the celebrity partners we've asked to be involved, usually when you start a campaign, it's very hard to get notable people to drop what they're doing and do something, especially over the holidays. We put out 100 and some asks thinking we'd get 10 or 11 people. We got 100. So from major sports teams, the Yankees, the Mets, NYCFC, to Broadway, to TV, to movies, it's been really overwhelming and speaks to, I think, how committed everyone is to the city.
Well, you talked about your corporate partners, how you were able to get celebrities signed up. I certainly had questions about that. But just going back to my original question, people want to know why Jonathan Rosen was the one who's starting this. What motivated you internally, aside from your one skill of PR and saying, I want to make a difference?
Sure. So, Risa and I both talk. There's a guy who maybe some of your listeners may have heard of, probably not. I think New York City is full of people who make enormous marks on the city that many New Yorkers don't know of. There's a guy named Jay Kriegel, who if you don't know who that is, you should go look up his obituary from last year, who was really a mentor to Risa and I and a whole generation of folks. He was John Lindsay's chief of staff in his early 20s in the 1960s, had a really storied civic career in New York, and led with Dan Dockeroff the city's Olympic bid for the 2012 Olympics. And he unfortunately passed away about a year ago. A lot of it was sort of like, what would Jay have done? Like, what are, this city has a rich history of patriots, of people, sort of stepped up and took responsibility. So both Risa and I and all of our partners have like a love affair with the city. I grew up, like a lot of people, I didn't grow up here. I grew up in the New Jersey suburbs, always with kind of like face pressed against the glass, wanting to get up the turnpike to New York. Came here for law school 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. Knew I was never going to leave. I have two great kids and who are products of the New York City public school system, and just feel an enormous debt to the city and a real commitment to doing whatever we can to help the city not just come back, because I'm sure that it will come back, but thrive better than before.
So it's an expression of your New York City patriotism. I love it. Let's talk about the pledge that people are signing online. What is it and what's in it?
Sure. So when we were talking over the summer with our sort of extended crew, some of the individuals I mentioned and others, our thought was like, what's the organizing principle here? What can we get people? How do we get people kind of in the door? Because we had a bunch of ideas that I think already seeing, and you're going to see as part of the campaign, which is spurring people to volunteerism and civic commitment, spurring people to give money to people in need. But we wanted to kind of organize it around one central idea. And we almost thought it was like a pledge allegiance to New York and its future. So the pledge is really simple. I think it expresses kind of values that I think most New Yorkers would see in their city, the city's resilience and grit and commitment to each other and to our neighborhoods. And it also acknowledges that it's not just enough to recover. I think one of the things we've all seen this year is many of the inequities in our city, racial, economic, well, they've always been there. I think we're just in such stark relief looking at disparate impact of COVID in terms of medical outcomes and deaths and spread of the disease, and so much of the impact of unemployment. And so, the pledge talked about how it's not enough just to come back, but we've got to come back better and more equitable than before. It celebrates the talent and resilience of New Yorkers, and it asks people to make a commitment and to sort of pledge their name to staying here. I don't just mean in a physical sense, but like pledging to stay kind of in mind and spirit, emotionally, and we mean physically, obviously too, but to stay involved and to stay active and to commit to playing an active role in the city's future. So that's the idea behind it. If you sign it, kind of the brass tacks are, we're going to be starting this week, actually, reaching out to signers about ways they can tangibly, in small ways or big ways, play a role in New York City's revitalization. So that could range from, a small contribution to Roar's Restaurant Worker Relief Fund for a New York Forever t-shirt, which will be launching in a few weeks, or it could range to a really big thing. We're talking to an organization called iMentor, which is New York City founded, works in Chicago, Boston, and New York with high school students in public high schools. And they look for mentor pairs to pair up one-to-one. And it's a 3-year commitment through someone's end of high school, beginning of college experience. They're looking to really expand their pool of mentors over the next year. There's an article in the New York Times just this week about how devastating COVID has been to mentorship programs. It's been hard for people to kind of get together and be together, that Big Brothers and others run. So, I think one thing we would hope to do is maybe bring that opportunity to somebody who's motivated to play a role. We have a great partnership with New York Cares, which I think is actually a very perfect partner. I mean, they emerged after 9/11, another period in New York's history where our future was not a given, and New Yorkers had to really come together. And the animating idea behind New York Cares was connecting New Yorkers to ways they can serve. They were one of our earliest and most encouraging conversations. And so as part of that partnership, people who sign the pledge, we're going to work to connect them to service opportunities through New York Cares in their neighborhood or citywide.
We talked about how it's a branding campaign, pumping up New Yorkers, and I can certainly feel that energy. You talked about how you want to engage 500,000 New Yorkers on your pledge. We talk a lot about this on the podcast, but what are some of the key performance indicators, those KPIs that
Sure.
You're going to say, you know what, we have achieved the things that we want?
Sure. So I think it's both quantitative and qualitative. We're just like, I'm sure many of the startup founders who are on your pod and listen to it, who are in the for-profit business, we're looking at time on our website, unique monthly and daily unique visitors, and the rate of social sharing and video sharing. So, we are tracking against goals to organically grow those platforms. We haven't spent any money promoting our digital accounts yet. We've gotten some great in-kind digital advertising support that's going to start soon from Google and from Facebook. But it's sort of a very kind of specific goal to grow the audience. And then qualitatively, for each of the engagements and activations, we have sort of specific goals. We are going to launch a New York Forever t-shirt, the first of a set of merch drops with the fashion industry in New York we're putting together. For each of them, we have a sales goal to drive revenue to roar. And then I think really concretely through our civic partnerships with New York Cares, as well as Citizens Committee for New York City, and hopefully iMentor, we want to be able to identify how many volunteers we drove to these opportunities. So I think we'll know if we're successful, if we're tracking towards that 500,000 people goal over the next few months. We see this as a year-long campaign for 2021. I mean, this is not both Risa and I and all of our colleagues. This is not our day job. We're all sort of doing this, as volunteers on the side. Our hope is that this is a year-long effort and that we can hopefully pass this brand and this list off to another civic organization to take up the mantle.
How many volunteer hours are you looking to get? Let's get a number. Let's get New Yorkers pumped up for how much they should volunteer.
We're hopeful that it will be in the tens of thousands that we can generate. I think we're still sort of modeling it out, and some of these opportunities are much heavier than others. But look, I think there's 1 million volunteer hours to be found through this campaign. And that's something we're really, really excited about the possibility of doing. And I think there's that. And I think there's hopefully also real fundraising that can be directed to New Yorkers most in need. We've been super excited to partner with Roar and their Restaurant Relief Fund. I mean, food service workers have been so at the tip of the spear of impact economically. Many of them don't have immigration status and access to public benefits. There's an article in the New York Times that popped just this morning as I was getting ready for this about the new faces of homelessness in New York City. And it featured a guy who for many, many years had worked at a fairly prominent steakhouse in Manhattan in the kitchen. And now he's living literally under a bridge in Queens. So we want to also help marshal the compassion of New Yorkers to get aid where it's needed most.
So there's a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of energy, I think, among New Yorkers to bring New York back. You have been able to develop what seems to be a very sophisticated and well-connected organization very quickly in all of this. How did you do that?
So our little steering committee that sort of came together over the summer and fall, which was the folks I mentioned, plus many, many more, too many to mention.
All your friends.
And Risa's, and Julie's. It was a big. It was this is not just this is a collective effort. I want to really emphasize that. We started to just make a list of people we could go to for different pieces. So, Tech Nyc helped reach out to the tech community in New York City, and they bought SalesForce and Ron Conway and Google and Squarespace and Gibson Dunn as our pro bono counsel. And they were all happy to help. Richard, our creative director, had, helped build and launch a number of startups and had a relationship with Verdes as a creative agency, went to them. Risa and I represent a number of the companies that were early corporate partners. So, in a lot of ways, this was like a old-fashioned barn raising of sort of everyone kind of made a list of, we had a Google Doc open on the call of who could go to who and what the ask was. I think in ways they'll probably resonate with more typical startup founders on your pod. We had the pitch deck. We sort of honed our rap and tried to put together a vision of how people could participate. And it did come together quickly. It was a lot of months kind of searching for what the it was, but once we landed on it, the fundraising largely occurred in a 6-week sprint, and the celebrity outreach maybe even shorter, a 4-week sprint, including 2 of those weeks being the weeks around Christmas and New Year's. And it was super inspiring. To see like Jerry Seinfeld over like Christmas, like at his house, tape a thing for us and send it to us. People were super generous. I think the takeaway for us was that, and you said it, people are passionate about the city. This is not a hard thing to get people to want to play a role in. I think it's kind of knowing who to get to ask and asking and giving them a concrete thing they can do that's immediate, right? Like people want to do something that they feel like you're making a very clear ask, it's actionable, you're going to follow up. And if they do it, it'll be productive. So, with all the celebrities and corporate partners, and we've had a very will you make this video? We did a very simple prompt for the video. We tried to make it as frictionless as possible. We had a video editor on standby. We put these videos together. And then we went back to each of them and their managers and their agents and their brands to say, all right, now we can help promote it. So yesterday we launched our sports video, and we put together a whole set of players and fans from New York's major teams. And then we went back to the teams and said, will you help promote it? And again, it's pretty low ask to say, will you share a video with your own franchise player? And that's kind of been the experience. It's also been one of these things is when you tell people the idea, it's everyone's doing it because they believe in the city. People are happy to open up their networks. I think we, in a way, people guard their networks for business purposes. The ask was, make a 1.5-minute video for New York, share it, participate in, with fashion brands, it was make an object that could be something iconic for New York that's branded. And today we released our fashion video today, but the guys at Public School, Prabal Gurung, Aurora James, Todd Snyder, Alex Mill. So many great brands. We're just yes, we're a New York-based fashion brand. We believe in a creative industry here. We'll make a shirt. We'll make a hat. And the fact that all the proceeds are going to restaurant worker relief, they sealed the deal.
So you talked about how you and your friends and their friends were able to raise this barn quickly, that it's certainly an initiative that you guys are looking for in 2021. What do you think the future holds for NY Forever in 2022 and beyond?
We hope that New York is reopen and healthy, and our schools are open, and everyone's vaccinated, and our unemployment rate is down, and things are great, and that this can become more of an effort to shine a light on so much of the good work that came out of this period and help it continue. Brass tacks organizationally, as I said before, both Risa and I run companies and have day jobs. This is not, we didn't start out to start a whole nother career. Our hope is that, there's a lot of great New York City civic organizations that are longstanding. There's New York City and Company, that if the brand is successful and the partnerships are successful, that one of them will want to pick up the mantle and run the next mile of the race.
And you talked about how you're a New York patriot. What's one tangible thing in Jonathan Rosen's life that you would like to change in New York?
I hope out of this, we all realize that the public services we take for granted are really vital. Our parks, our subways, our libraries, and that we dedicate ourselves to investing in them like never before. That's my hope.
Jonathan wants a new park, a new subway, a new library.
Not a new one. Just us to all continue to look. I think for a lot of New Yorkers, we take. I love Prospect Park. I've lived in Brooklyn for 20 years, and but you take it for granted. And I don't know how many, I don't know you, but I don't know how many people I know who've said they've never spent more time in the city's park system than they did this year as a refuge, as a place to be with their kids. Yeah. And look, I think also my other hope for the city is I think we've all learned a thing or two about who essential workers are and how we need to value them and respect them. I think we have to really have a new deal to help support restaurant workers and delivery workers and grocery store workers. They're really the lifeblood of the city. And I think we have to all think about as a city how we can support them.
Jonathan says, don't take your New York City services for granted. He's here to support New York. That is a wonderful note to end this on. Jonathan, how do people get more involved in the NY Forever campaign?
Thank you for asking. They can go to nyforever.nyc on the web. They can go to Instagram, which I think is the most fun way to engage with the campaign, where we're doing a lot of our most creative work, and that's just simply at nyforever. Twitter, same. And hope you will take the pledge, share it with everybody you know, and get involved.
And buy that merch.
Buy that merch. I have a feeling it's going to sell it very quickly.
He says they're going to go very quickly, so get on there now. nyforever.nyc. That's where you're selling them?
Yep.
Well, Jonathan Rosen, thank you very much for stepping on the New York Launch Pod and sharing your time with us.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
And if you want to learn more about the New York Launch Pod, you can visit nylaunchpod.com for transcripts of every episode, including this one, and follow us on social media at nylaunchpod. And if you are a fan of the New York Launch Pod, Jonathan, NY Forever, are you a fan of the New York Launch Pod?
100%.
If you're a fan like Jonathan, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It is greatly appreciated and does help people discover the show.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the New York Launch Pod. For more information, please visit nylaunchpod.com.